We've had a double, one of those things that just happens. Unfortunately, João fell sick the day he was leaving to come from Angola. And he's been hospitalized, but he's such an amazing person. He actually sent us a story to be read to represent him and his thoughts on the sea is history. Actually this session was supposed to be moderated by Lillian, and Lillian has woken up ill as well. So she's not able to be here. And what we had hoped she would do with Lillian was that I would read the story, and which I have. It's an amazing story. I went through it. It was sent to me last night. And then we'll just have a chat. I'll give you a little bit of context of what I know about him. I don't know very much. But really what we want to do is to start by really situating this theme, the sea is history. If we have time, I'll also do a small story from Angola is wherever I plant my field. It just so happened that Joao was going to be in my panel session this afternoon, so I've been doing some background reading. And I just want to start by saying, I don't know how much, has anybody looked him up? Does anybody know anything about him? No? We can talk to each other. We're a nice small group. So he's from Angola and has been doing a lot of work. As you know, this festival is about really, it started with the dream of bringing voices of African writers, and African writers in particular, and when I say Africa, I mean big picture Africa, global Africa, in conversation with Kenyans, and especially being able to expose those of us from East Africa who mostly write in Swahili and English to other Africans who are writing things that we thought was of interest to us. And so this story is written in Portuguese. His work is in Portuguese, and then it is translated. So without further ado, I'm going to start reading. I'll read the first story. Is a long story, so bear with me. It's about 30 minutes. And I might stop halfway, just depending on how I feel the room, and get some thoughts from you. Are we okay with that? Hadithi. Okay, so I should say that I'm trained in the tradition of storytelling that believes in call and response. Huh? So if I stop, please don't feel like, oh my God, what is she doing? But just to get a sense. Again, the sea is history is the theme of this Macondo festival. So just put that in your minds as we speak, as we read, as we talk, as I tell you this story. The story is called The Day Charles Bosangwa Arrived in America, by João Melo, translated by Clifford E. Landers. The world had not yet lost its way when the Marabouts told Charles Bosangwa that he would arrive in America, of course, by way of New York City, and that it would be raining the day he landed at JFK Airport. He lived in an obscure slum in a remote African city, unworthy perhaps of any literary attention, in the midst of other equally indigent beings, unemployed, beset by malaria and other arcane diseases that stubbornly resisted domestication, sexually out of control, hounded daily in the streets, alleyways, and squares by millions of religious messages, ecumenical, delirious, and aggressive, salvatory in intent, that pierced his body and shredded his fragile brain, packed with empty, dangerous, and perhaps pre-revolutionary thoughts. All these nameless messengers coexist in a heterodox but imperious relationship with dirty, squalid dogs, shameless, cynical rats, agitated pigs, hens, and even young goats. Like a veritable community that in an extraordinary display of peaceful coexistence that others should emulate, shared the cramped and labyrinthine space available, the plentiful puddles of dark water infused with mud and other detritus, some of it enigmatic, and the foul smell that completely permeated a universe enclosed upon itself from which nothing ever emerged, or nothing would ever emerge to the rest of the planet. Thus, everything seemed to be in its place, a perfect balance that makes things work. One day, however, Charles Bosangwa woke up with a headache. But it wasn't a normal headache, one of those that had manifested themselves since before he was born. For he had inherited it in the placenta of his mother, and it would accompany him all his life, up to the inevitable episode called death, which would be transmitted in like fashion to his descendants, and to the descendants of their descendants, and to the descendants of their descendants, and to the descendants of their descendants. Such headaches he took in stride. If they extended through his forehead and were more or less diffuse, accompanied by generalized and uncharacteristic body pain, the probable cause was malaria. If they were concentrated in the middle of the forehead, and in some cases spread to the nasal sinus, the cheeks, and often the eyes, it was merely a symptom of a cold, however bothersome. Finally, those especially intense and irritating pains localized at the crown of his head, behind his ears, or at the back of his neck could only have one treacherous and insidious cause: hypertension. The headache with which Charles Bosangwa woke up on the day when he made the unforeseeable decision that, for reasons to which I am at present unaware, would come to jolt in an unusual and profound way the great American nation, unless there is some surprise before the end of this account. This was completely unlike the atavistic headaches that had always plagued him. In truth, it was so strange that he himself didn't know how to characterize and define it, much less identify its cause. I will therefore not presume to relate it. Artistic license, or if you wish, irresponsibility, has its limits. What matters is that morning, Charles Bosangwa decided to emigrate to the United States. Actually, the United States was already inside him for a long time. It entered him through his eyes and ears by way of multiple, simplified, and explicit messages that randomly and uncontrollably, the thought, circulated in the networks that cross and unify the weakened planetary flesh, contaminating it beyond repair. Fiber optics, satellites, transoceanic cables, radio, television, internet, emails, Viber, WhatsApp, Instagram, whatever, phrases, sentences, images, labels, anathemas, truths, lies, half-truths, half-lies, post-truths, post-lies. The great world system disseminating through the centers that command Hollywood through the innocent and benign veins of YouTube, Netflix, and others that are being secretly designed at this precise moment. Simple entertainment, obviously, about which I am not complaining. The fact is that when he decided to emigrate and claim the part of the American Big Apple to which he had a right, Charles Bosangwa already knew that after arriving at JFK, all he had to do was hail a yellow cab for his life to be completely transformed from that truly magical, extraordinary instant. He would enter the promised land, the only, the authentic. He was more than ready for it, because ever since he had discovered himself as a person blessed with self-awareness, he knew all the places, icons, remembrances, signs, and notices, from Manhattan to the Statue of Liberty, from the Harlem ghetto to the jazz clubs of New Orleans, the broad prairies of the Midwest, the now extinct Navajo and Sioux Indians, the beaches of San Francisco, the glamour of Hollywood, the opportunities that grew in the streets like grass in his village, the self-made men, the limitless freedom and democracy, replete and shining like an eternal and loving sun, enveloping and protecting every man and woman who were known for a concept that Charles Bosangwa, born in a remote African village, one the author cannot name for fear of disturbing the readers, could only dream of. Citizens. By one of the mysteries that silently propelled humanity towards so-called origins, he too wanted to be a citizen, though he couldn't say why, much less explain the desire rationally. So, it was time to leave the place that consumed and injured him and depart for America. There he knew with total and irrefutable certainty he would instantly be converted into a citizen, something that in his birth village he would be denied forever. Things went more or less as he had foreseen. He first arrived in Agadez in the cargo bed of a ramshackle truck carrying men and women depleted by the harshness of their lives, enfeebled and dust-covered, their eyes bloodshot, lips dry like brute animals, but strangely animated by a visceral force, both radical and indomitable, perhaps a foolish hope, that made them create energy from the parched landscape devoid of any speculation, truly imponderable, rise above their own waste and even above the vast universal death enveloping them all like a vicious, lethal exhalation. To breathe it consciously or inadvertently was to succumb, that hovered over everything like titans, perhaps like the sculptures of Usman So, walking, forging ahead in the direction of the future, firm, resolute, ready to be swallowed up by that magnetic, voracious, implacable black hole that they mistook for happiness. Alongside these extraordinary beings were 5 or 6 domesticated or semi-domesticated animals, dogs, hens, goats, each one more downcast than the other, amid packages, boxes, bundles, sacks, and suitcases, bearing all the dreams of these 21st century African emigrants. When the truck arrived in Agadez, to the square already lined with others very similar trucks, judging by the lamentable condition of their chassis, tires, and other details, it didn't seem as if Charles Bosangwa had eaten a decent meal in 3 days. He descended confidently to the street, stretched his legs, brushed off the dust, looked around, animated by an unshakable certainty. Even if he had to fight all the gods, ancestral or contemporary, he was steadfast in his plan to make it to America. To speak about Agadez, I need not resort to imagination to describe that town. I therefore call on Wikipedia. Agadez, A-G-A-D-E-Z, formerly written A-G-A-D-E-S, is the largest city in central Niger with a population of 118,244 in the 2012 census. Founded before the 14th century, it became the most important Tuareg city and is today a flourishing market and center for the transportation of uranium extracted from the region. Since 2013, it has also been a starting point for the present-day African emigrants heading to Europe via Libya. Charles Bosangwa knew what he must do to cross the desert and reach the Libyan refugee centers before embarking for the southern coast of Europe and from there to America, that he had yearned for ever since he became capable of distinguishing mere innocent fantasy from real and concrete dreams, and to obey the latter. I assume, and take full responsibility for doing so, he had no knowledge of the Portuguese poet for whom, whenever a man dreams, the world trembles and moves forward, like a colorful ball in the hands of a child. But he did know that to realize his dream, he would have to negotiate with the various smugglers who even today abound in Agadez, as they alone know the most appropriate routes. Those that, what I'm about to say, naturally is only a literary supposition, even satellites can't detect, to make possible the Ardaus crossing through the desert to the Mediterranean. Charles Bosangwa had prepared well for the adventure of which he dreamed from the day he was alerted by a strange and diverse sign from the gods, that mysterious headache, and would accompany him to that. Let me take that again. Charles Bosangwa had prepared well for the adventure of which he dreamed from the day he was alerted by a strange and diffuse sign from the gods, that mysterious headache, that would accompany him to America. In addition to the correct contacts to help him find the most reliable smugglers, he knew the amount to pay them, and above all, what and how to tell them. He had also put together a mental list of dangers to avoid. He knew when to yield and when, simply and without drama, it was better to accept death. The wretched of the earth are born negotiators, for their survival depends on it, but they don't know the meaning of the word drama. Their existence is a permanent tragedy. The crossing of the desert between Niger and Libya occurred without incident and therefore needs no description. But the saga of Charles Bosangwa didn't end upon completion of that crossing. Before embarking in a boat for the Italian island of Lampedusa, he spent 3 months in a refugee welcoming center in Libya. Did I say welcoming? For Charles Bosangwa and countless other immigrants, such centers are not exactly welcoming. They should actually more accurately be called detention centers. In the 3 months he spent there waiting to continue the journey to dreamed of America, Charles Bosangwa had to work like a veritable slave, performing forced labor from morning till night. Circumstances entailed concessions that from the day God showed him the road to the promised land, he knew he could and must make in order to realize his dream. And some, he swore on the same day, he would never accept, preferring death to being the victim of sexual predation. During the 3 months in the center, he witnessed frequent violations of other immigrants, men and women, episodes that I hope may shock the readers, but were quickly normalized by the human beings piled in that place that they subconsciously defined as temporary, as they relied on their lucidity to overcome the despair of their situation. If the journey was to continue, hope must be maintained at all costs. Violence, in all its forms, is a daily occurrence in the welcoming centers in Libya. During his stay at the center in Misrata, a Mediterranean sea in the western part of the country, between the sea and the sand, Charles Bosangwa experienced and witnessed all its manifestations. Because human cruelty knows no limits, some of the manifestations were filmed by their perpetrators, who used such recordings to extort money from the victims' families. Charles Bosangwa reacted to all this with a silence, outwardly serene and detached, but in truth, ferocious and determined. He could do nothing to save those people as wretched as he, but their sense of frustration made him stronger. He had to resist, had to survive, to continue the journey to America. His salvation would also be the salvation of those men and women who only dreamed of no longer being slaves and becoming human beings, equal to everyone else in any part of the world, even if most of them would not survive that journey of redemption. History doesn't lie. The majority of the destitute end their days washing up, sometimes literally, on the sands of the shore, as in this case, but the triumph of one of them, any of them, is the triumph of all. For a single example suffices to grow the number of those who dare to dream, who rise up and pursue a dream of their own, who resist the acts of violence committed by all who try in vain to block the world from advancing, as long prophesied by the Portuguese poet, whom Charles Bosangwa doesn't know but loves, I am certain, with total fury and conviction. The day the smuggler with whom he had been negotiating since arriving in Misrata sought him out to advise him that the departure would be 4 o'clock that night on the dot, Charles Bosangwa was sitting outside the tent he shared with dozens of other men and women, an enigmatic glow in his gaze and his heart softly racing. Let me explain. A few days earlier, he had met Ayana, and from that moment on, the despair that had led him to abandon his village and set out for America had softened and transformed as if by a miracle. Ayana was another sign from heaven. Deep-set eyes, prominent cheeks, moderately fleshy lips, attractive braids descending gracefully down her back almost to ribs, covered by a white blouse that accentuated the colorful skirts she wore every day. She had a body seemingly designed to order, neither too exuberant nor so discreet as to appear unworthy of an appreciation. Perfect breasts, proportional waist, molded legs whose firmness as they touched the ground gave Charles Bosangwa a sensation of security that he had never known. The enigmatic fear that had accompanied him throughout the journey to the welcoming center on the Libyan coast, from which he planned to make his way to Europe and from there to America, as I've said, disappeared as soon as he met that woman. But I am beholden to add that it in no way weakened his decision. The difference is that he was no longer fed by despair, rage, and anguish, but was replaced by gentleness and tranquility. In fact, what motivated him ceased to be anguish and struggle and came to be certainty. Perhaps messianic, perhaps ingenuous. However many sacrifices and concessions he might have to make, he would get to where he would change entirely and start a new life with Ayana. So, he had to negotiate with the smuggler an extra place on the boat that would leave that night for Italy. The last of his savings went to the negotiation. But Charles Bosangwa knew he was doing the right thing. The determinations of the heart are always the right thing to do, even when they turn out badly. Ayana, therefore, had to go with him. Period. The smuggler, who had a lengthy business history forged among the several peoples who have forever inhabited the region, obviously showed no pity and made Charles Bosangwa use his final penny for the additional place requested at the last minute. Later, he came to call that the law of supply and demand, which I enter here merely as a note, surely without any utility in the narrative. By the way, as I've also said, Charles Bosangwa had no misgivings about accepting the price established by the smuggler for including Ayana in the boat that would leave in a few hours for the island of Lampedusa, which Google tells us is one of the Pelagi Islands south of Italy, known for its shallow water beaches and colorful marine life. Such description was completely unknown to Charles Bosangwa, and in any case, held no interest for him. He was not going on a tourist cruise or vacation or on a vacation, but he was on an authentic saga that began in the center of Africa, en route to salvatory America. Now that he had found Ayana, he was more certain than ever that his dream would come to fruition. Together, the couple would succeed. Charles Bosangwa refrained from telling the smuggler that his final destination was America for fear of having to pay more for his services. He was already completely broke. He had to get to Europe, find work, whatever it might be, even the unspeakable, in order to make some money and continue the journey to the new world, which in his heart, and thanks to Hollywood, he was as sure he knew as well as he knew himself, at least beginning with the precise and fantastic instant when he had become aware that he could escape the fate destined for him, since he came into the world in that village whose name he had already forgotten completely and irrevocably. Now, the departure had to be delayed for several hours for reasons of safety. The Libyan Coast Guard had decided to spring a raid precisely at the beach from which would leave the boat, carrying Charles Bosangwa and Ayana, along with dozens of other desperate emigrants ready to brave the Mediterranean in pursuit of their individual dreams, those revealed and shared, and those unspoken. The smuggler was livid when the soldiers appeared, for he had already paid them off. But he obviously knew how to deal with things. Truth be told, he carried the knowledge in his very blood, which is why he had earlier paid the agreed upon amount to the commander of the local unit, more than the customary price, because in the meantime, the government of Libya had begun receiving a stipend from the European Union to stem the flow of emigrants. This raised the cost of the services the police offered the emigrants, which consisted of, invariably, arriving after the departure of the clandestine boats. Such were the laws of the market. Why the devil had those bastards decided to raise a ruckus when everything had been settled beforehand? The smuggler, beside fuming right and left, had the necessary experience to understand what was going on. So, after more than an hour of negotiation with the soldiers of the Libyan Coast Guard and the emigrants, he managed to arrive at an additional sum to be paid in order for the departure to proceed without further problems. The emigrants had to scrape up their last savings. The term, considered the given context, is almost insulting, but nothing else occurs to me, as this was the only reasonable alternative. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to leave, and if they resisted, would be shot, using bullets acquired by the Libyan authorities with funds from the European Union. It was nearly 6 a.m. when the boat finally set out to sea. All too soon, the sun would appear over the horizon, which made swiftness and energy imperative to navigate as quickly as possible before the heat obliged them to reduce the pace and raise the sunshade that the sailors had brought for such occasions. The secret, as everyone knew, was to navigate as much as possible at night, not only because of that problem, but above all, to avoid the patrol boats that of late, by exact and crystalline terms of the agreements between their own governments and that of the European Union authorities, ferociously hunted African emigrants who dared to confront the Mediterranean with Europe as their goal. According to the unanimous understanding of all parties, this was intended to slow the brain drain, a condition considered sine qua non to achieve the coveted development. I have no desire to argue. My role is simply to describe that crucial stage in the voyage of Charles Bosangwa, now accompanied by Ayana, on his way to America. Under certain conditions, under normal conditions, when good weather and high visibility, under normal conditions, with good weather and high visibility, the trip from the Libyan coast to the island of Lampedusa may take 3 hours. But, good weather or bad, the time of the crossing seemed like an eternity. I borrow here the words of Ana Paulo Cruz. Do you know how dark is the sea at night? How solitary, how painful or abandoned, how painful the silence of the world that watches and moves. Other accounts mention rafts suddenly deflating in a fraction of a second, bodies abruptly sinking into the depths, fighting to stay on the surface, their piercing cries greeted by their own futility, and then replaced by absolute and sepulchral silence. One day, a recovery vessel found itself unable to take aboard the floating corpses, as it was surrounded by black dots in every direction, making movement impossible. The black dots were cadavers, said the captain, adding, there were so many, all of them, everywhere, around the boat. Bodies on all sides. Another especially horrifying story dealt with the boat that had capsized and was discovered intact in 50 meters of water with no bodies on board or anywhere in the vicinity. The cadavers had simply disappeared. The boat seemed a specter, completely empty. It was like an accusing ghost. Charles Bosangwa was ignorant of any of these stories, but in some way that is not my task to explain, they came into his head during the voyage from the Libyan coast to the Italian island of Lampedusa, from which he was planning to continue his journey to America. Actually, such stories were in the heads of the close to 70 emigrants, men, women, and children, with him in the vessel. None of them, however, put it into words, perhaps fearing it might suddenly materialize. Call it superstition or not, it is incumbent on us to respect it. Charles Bosangwa was sitting beside Ayana, and the couple was holding hands. Despite having been acquainted for only a short time, each already knew everything about the other, at least as much as is necessary for them to come to the only decision that makes an encounter between two human beings worthwhile, namely building a future together. This was what they had decided to do: arrive in America. There, they would put everything behind them and shape a new identity and a new reality just for them and for the children they would have and raise with love and care. Neither of them had any doubts. Nothing matters but the future. For this reason, the thousands of ghosts lying at the bottom of the Mediterranean didn't frighten them. They would arrive in Lampedusa and request the assistance of an NGO to continue to another European country, maybe England or some Scandinavian nation, and finally find a way to America. Charles Bosangwa was especially calm. Ayana had rested his head in his lap and fallen asleep. The sun continued to manifest itself in all of its fullness, but the captain didn't erect the sunshade as the temperature was pleasant and they were less than 2 kilometers from the beaches of Lampedusa. Charles Bosangwa had programmed entering America through JFK Airport in New York, more or less 6 months after making it to Europe, leaving behind forever the unknown village which he had been born in the heart of Africa. He knew, remember, that he would need that time to be able to work and make some money. He had chosen the aforementioned airport rather than any other in homage to a certain American president that he liked, less from historical knowledge than from the power of universal imagination. On the day Charles Bosangwa was to arrive at JFK Airport, New York was its usual self, as if connected to some electric source, emanating an energy and a vibration from which the millions of pedestrians enraptured come from literally every place in the world to imbibe. There was no sun. A fine rain was falling that in any other city would be irritating, but in that place did not prevent anyone from circulating rapidly through the streets, from the luminous buildings of Times Square to the showcase windows of Fifth Avenue to Central Park to Highland Park to the stretch between Chelsea and the meat-picking district to the Williamsburg Bridge in Brooklyn and other areas recommended by travel sites, without forgetting, of course, the less glamorous parts in the city. Charles Bosangwa didn't physically know any of these places, but they had been inside him for years. He wanted to be there. Above all, he longed to be in the midst of those people, frenetically moving through all those places, coming from nearby or from so many other places, located thousands of kilometers away, but who were transfigured there as if they had known one another forever. No one asked questions of anyone, nor was it necessary. The city had welcomed them and made all of them its children. Charles Bosangwa wanted to be one of them. He and Diana. During the entire journey from his native village to Agadez, from there to the Misrata region in the Libyan coast, after crossing the desert, from where they would depart in a rubber raft, accompanied by an unexpected but eternal love, en route to Lampedusa, one of the Pelagi Islands in the south of Italy, to which it was imperative to arrive in order to continue his journey to America. Charles Bosangwa dreamed, I will arrive on a day when it's lightly raining, immediately lose myself among the crowd in the streets, change myself, become one of them, begin a new life. marry a beautiful woman with deep-set eyes and live a secure life. We'll have 3 children. We'll raise them with love and attention. And our gaze will always be towards the future. The Italian carabiniere manning the Lampedusa border post knew nothing of Charles Bosangwa's dreams. Nor did he know that the vessel in which he and Diana had managed to arrive a little more than a kilometer from Lampedusa had struck an underwater rock and floundered. The emigrants, most of whom didn't know how to swim, dispersed as each attempted to save themselves as best as they could, as well as their loved ones. Charles Bosangwa and Ayana clung to each other anxiously in desperation. Luckily, he knew how to swim and protected the woman. After swimming for half an hour without seeing anyone, they spotted a lighthouse on a span of land. It was Lampedusa, and they headed towards it. The sun was high, in a position that should have blinded the carabiniere serving as lookout in the glassy outpost in the lighthouse. Should. 2 shots were heard. Wary. Accurate. Enough to prevent Charles Bosangwa and Ayana from arriving in America. Him and Diane. Thank you. That was The Day Charles Bosangwa Arrived in America by João Melo. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? Our theme is The Sea is History. I wonder if we could anybody would like to share some immediate thoughts. I know you want to sit in it a bit longer. But any thoughts? Yes, you have a mic, please. And for those of you who are just joining us, I had begun by saying, unfortunately, Joao was taken ill and was unable to come to join us in Nairobi, literally on the day he was supposed to leave Luanda to come to us. So he sent us this story to be read instead. So yes, please go ahead.
First of all, you've done justice to the story. Well done.
Thank you.
Now, I'm thinking in terms of, it's such an epic ending for me. Unfortunately, the sea has swallowed what would be a history of Charles, in the fact that he has taken so long from his headaches and all that to a journey that I was hoping would end in them being there, but I loved the twist at the end. And I'm also happy that he didn't end with only Charles, but both of them. So the tragic ending for me is more of a history where I'm looking at how many slaves died on their way to freedom. So what has the sea done to these guys? Thank you.
What has the sea done to these guys, these dreams they had? Anyone else? Thank you for starting us off. What has the sea done? We're talking about the sea is history. What histories do the seas carry? What has the sea done? Is it the sea we blame? I'm seeing someone go, yeah, please.
Thank you so much. You did a lovely job reading the story.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate. I'll start by saying the sea, what has the sea done? Like the sea has given Charles and Ayana a home for their unlived dreams. Because if you were to die in the sea, it's better than to die in a land that is not yours, and they would totally disregard your body and just, disrespect it at its last times. But at this particular time, even though it's a tragedy, somehow the sea was able to just give Charles and Ayana a very good resting place, although it's not the appropriate one. But I feel like it comes off like a place they get to rest, even if their dreams are with their dead dreams, rather than going to the other state. Who even shot them before they got there? I wonder what would have happened if they landed there. It would have been their death would have been more even miserable. I like the way the story captures the theme of love in a very subtle way, and the theme of betrayal, because our own people keep on betraying us. Because I imagine, for me, when I was hearing the story and the step he did, he went to the refugee camp, he went to all these places step by step, yeah. He felt like he was reaching the milestones, This is the time I'll do this here, do that there, and accepting to leave the past and be happy with it because he knew the future was much promising. But on the reality on the ground is that it's all an illusion, that whole process for you to go to America. You don't know it. You know there's a way. It's not a comfortable way. It's not a comfortable route, but I'm willing to sacrifice whatever it takes, because by the end of it all, I know that I'll land in the promised land. But what is on the ground is that it's an illusion. It's created by the way he said, by saying how the Hollywood movies put the pictures in us and everything, and you have this dream of going to their land where you can be able to be free and just live your wildest dreams. And in the Wikipedia, the way he described in all these other places, it's like it's an illusion that you will get home or you get to the end. But on the ground, it's all lies from them paying, thinking now we have paid enough money, we should get what we pay for, but they don't get that. They get to be killed just before that. And it seems like it's something that happens. So who's the one who are gaining? Is it the European unions who are funding the process? Is it the soldiers, the guy who was bargaining for Charles was bargaining with? Who is really winning in this illusion state of you getting somewhere? Yes, thank you.
So
much.
I'm contrasting that thought. Yeah. We talk about people who are enslaved, so they were forced to leave. And now we're talking about people who are leaving because home no longer has what their dreams are not, they have nothing to dream of. And it seems like this whole continent, our whole continent betrays them, but the other continents are not welcoming to them. And so they're ending up in this in-between space of the seas. I love that contrast. Anybody else with a thought? Yes, just right behind here.
Thank you very much, Mshai, for animating that story. I think to me the very incredible thing is how the sea becomes a space for us to live our dreams and to find love. I think Charles was not able to really encounter motivating or inspiring love up until he was next to the sea. And even he died, or he faced his end in the sea. So the sea his history is that the sea gives us a chance to find ourselves and to find our love.
I love that, except that now I'm beginning to feel really like, ooh, the sea, because the sea is about us living in this story. And that's where we find our dreams, we find our love. And I'm thinking about, let me just bring it back home. Are we mostly Kenyans in the room, or am I going to embarrass us if I speak in the presence of others? This thing we say, Ninaenda Maju, that dream so many have of when I leave, when I go, right? Maju is just because now people fly, but others are going overseas, literally. What is this dream that we feel our personal histories get meaning when we leave as opposed to when we stay? And this, I love this thought of even love. He leaves his village, which he just wants to forget. He's got nothing. He's left nothing behind. And love comes when he's leaving, literally at the shores. That's an interesting thought for me. What does that mean to us? And that so many of us today look, okay, we might be here, but our hearts are really elsewhere. And is it the fault of those who are out there who say, actually, we don't want you people, but it's okay? So I'm just putting my thoughts in relation to that, because when you were speaking, I thought, that's painful also to hear. Any thoughts? And you can disagree with me, please feel free. Or thoughts on anything else? João sent this story because he really wanted to be here to speak and he couldn't. So the story is him speaking to us. At the back.
Thank you so much for doing the story justice. For me, I would want to see maybe there was the power of superstition, even as we are looking for hope. That is one thing that came out very well. So as I was saying, the power of superstition, and then the foreshadowing in the story. There's that time I'd already seen it that maybe they will die also. When he had those thoughts that the dead are there, also he's trying to push away the thoughts. And then it also brought something home. In the Lake Victoria, they usually say that the dead are usually there, something called Nyawawa. So they're calling people, they're trying to bring other people to the sea. So maybe for me, with the theme, the sea is history, maybe the people in the sea are trying to save Charles Basangwa, as she was saying. My thoughts also connected with her. And I think this is an interesting story, bringing out also hope and how at times hope kills. Even at the end, when they were around the lighthouse, they know the God is there, but they're saying maybe the sun is too high, it will blind him and it won't shoot them. So the hope is there, is driving him even to his death, but he could not see because he wanted this thing very bad. And then something that shackled me, it was the way he wanted to live so bad that he didn't even mention the village. Yeah, so again, hope of wanting something good, but at the end, it turns out on the negative. Thank you.
This sense of the future is more important than the past, because the past has nothing for him. And so he's focused on the future. Even if it means dying for it, he's willing to take the risk. Any other thoughts? Yes. There too.
Good morning. Thank you for a lovely story. I was jotting some things as you were reading, and there was something about artistic license versus responsibility. And there was something about truths and half-truths and lies and half-lies. And to me, is like this guy, either from ignorance or because he was so desperate, he built a world in his head that really did not exist. And to me, terrible as it sounds, maybe it is better that he died in the sea than ended up getting to America, because I don't know how he would have reacted to America.
That is true. And I think somebody, okay, she's there too. You can get there, then you're like, oh my goodness. Yeah, it is, what is that, Njuki, which is it's Mosese in Betrayal in the City. It was better while we waited. Francis Mbuga's play. It was better because then you've got that hope he talked about is keeping you going. And when you get there and it's dashed, you're just devastated.
All right, so I'll begin with your sentiments to his earlier state remarks, and I think I would quote Warson, where she says, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark." We don't know why Charles left in this case, but it's probable to imagine that the conditions back at home in Niger were untenable. And then secondly, I love that Melo gave visibility to immigrants' experience in this story. Rarely do we have such a glimpse of immigrants' experiences, and in modern day news, we only know of what has happened at the border or the kind of policies UK or the global North put out to stem immigrants. And then lastly, I think the line in the story about the wretched of the earth was such a harbinger of the tragic ending that was about to come to Charles and Diana. Thank you.
It was a lovely text to put in conversation. Thank you. I thought what I might do as we close out is leave you with a fragment of a story. A fragment because I want you to go and buy the book. This book is hilarious. I got it. You know those books that you pick? And then they have all this is an anthology, short stories. And each of them is just hilarious. I really wanted to get into the mind of the person who would write these kind of stories. So with your permission, I'll finish up by a fragment of this. Because I know she's looking at me with about time. Yeah, let's see how far she let me read before. When she stops me, I stop. Blame her. So this story, and thank you for those thoughts. I'm putting them there, then I'll ask if anybody has another thought. But it's also because that story is it takes you up there, then it drops you. So this story is another of his stories, and you'll get to get a sense of how he speaks. It's called The Revolutionary Duck and the Counter-Revolutionary Duck. To Kasesa. Angolans, in addition to loving macas, partying till morning, arriving late for appointments, and using and abusing humor even against themselves, were postmodern before the concept was even invented. Iconoclasts, they don't take anything too seriously to the point of behaving like jerks. This term may not be very literary, but what to do when the writer himself is Angolan? When it comes to lessons, rules, models that the world has been trying to impose on them forever. Contemporary history is full of examples that confirm the profound and multiple irresponsibility of Angolans. Firstly, when millions were taken to the Americas as slaves, not only did they resist being completely destroyed by brutal exploitation and unknown diseases, as well as such as influenza and syphilis, but they taught their very oppressors how to forge iron, extract diamonds and gold from the ground, and how to plant and harvest sugarcane and coffee. They also taught the oppressors how to play and dance to the ancestral rhythms they carried in their blood and which they spread from the cotton fields in the north of the American continent to the pampas in the south. They reinvented the languages imposed upon them, introducing thousands of new words and expressions. They contributed to the Africanization of the Indo-European religions they encountered across the new continent. They created heroes like Zumba in Brazil and the 19 Angolans who contributed to the fight for independence in Chile. Finally, they transformed the vast and sunny region between the Caribbean and Brazil into a warehouse full of mixed-race girls, quite correctly considered to be an authentic global product nowadays. Meanwhile, those who stayed in their homeland welcomed the foreign aggressors in a way that will remain forever in the annals of human conviviality. Fighting them fiercely, they nevertheless did business with them, handing over their daughters for marriage, adopting their religions, while teaching them ghostly rituals that would drive them crazy, tasting the aggressors' wishy-washy wine while offering them their own unknown drinks to taste, and lastly, taking them into the depths of the most remote parts of their country where they would get yellow fever and die hopelessly. For those who are unaware, I should add that these different and multiple strategies were not used alternately, but simultaneously, to the despair of the invaders, who to this day have been utterly unable to get to fully know the Angolans, particularly their instinct for survival and their flexibility. One particularly incomprehensible detail for the aforementioned invaders was how, in the course of this extraordinary process, the Angolans were mixing not only amongst themselves, but with the invaders too, both killing and desperately fornicating with them, thus swallowing up each other in an incredible history of blood and laughter, crime and redemption, all the time making them more and more Angolan. As proof that extreme ends really do meet, this is considered the height of responsibility, not only by past invaders, but also by contemporary ultra-nationalist and neo-racist Kazumbis. More recently, Angolans were the authors of two of the most prodigious operations of social engineering in contemporary history. They transformed Marxist-Leninist socialism into a schematic socialism and neoliberal capitalism into mafia capitalism. Some authors call the former Afro-Stalinism and the latter savage capitalism. But these are ideological titles without any use whatsoever, and fine postmodern literature should not waste time on them. If Comrade Chang Park Lee knew a little bit of Angolan history, not the one taught in the guides and manuals, but everyday one, which in truth is yet to be written because that task would require overcoming several general prejudices and preconceptions, he would have immediately been wary of the question asked by the MPLA guerrilla who arrived in North Korea only 2 weeks earlier for his training. If a drake lays an egg on the border between North and South Korea, who owns the egg? Comrade Lee felt, as we say, like scratching his head. He had just sat himself down, having just given a class about the historic treason of the South Korean regime, whose leaders were no more than a bunch of hawkers who had submitted themselves to the abominable and detestable imperialism of North America. During that class, he had told the students, a bunch of young revolutionaries who came from various areas of the then so-called Third World, from neighboring Vietnam to faraway Nicaragua, and all of whom were understandably well-intentioned, like all young people, whether revolutionaries or not, to feel free to ask any questions and express any doubts. Come again? He asked, while considering the best answer to such an unusual question. It's very simple, said the young Angolan guerrilla. Just imagine, Comrade Professor, that a drake lays an egg very precisely on the border between North and South Korea. To which country does the egg belong? The teacher could not resist it and scratched himself discreetly before replying with as much certainty as he could. Well, the egg would surely be a little more to this side. It could only belong to North Korea. No. The egg was laid exactly in the middle of the border, not even a millimeter nearer this side, their side, or our side. In that case, said the professor, the drake must have been fleeing from South Korea to join the glorious revolution of the Korean people, led by our great leader, Comrade President Kim Il-sung. Therefore, the egg must belong to North Korea. The inquisitive guerrilla must have been from Malanje or Katate, because according to the idiosyncrasies of the Angolan people, the inhabitants of both towns always think that they are smarter than anyone else, speaking almost in a whisper and choosing his words carefully. With a slight mocking, if discreet look in his eyes, he insisted, Comrade Professor, I'm so sorry, but the drake was not leaving South Korea since he was from North Korea. This was a revolutionary duck. The professor responded instinctively, if not mechanically. He was a traitor. If he laid an egg on the border, that means he was attempting to flee. I don't disagree, Comrade Professor, but you have not answered the question. What about the egg? Comrade Chang Pak Lee thought with some surprise that the young MPLA guerrilla wanted to test his loyalty to the just cause of the Korean Revolution and the teachings of the great leader, Kim Il-sung. Therefore, he decided to end this sorry joke once and for all. Almost shrieking, he said, "The Drake was a counter-revolutionary. But no matter what our brave freedom fighters guarding the border would never have allowed the southern henchmen to take hold of that egg." On hearing such a definitive and forceful statement, it was now the Angolan guerrilla who was shocked. He could imagine the egg full of holes in the middle of the border, in the security zone between the two Koreas, while the poor duck was destroyed, its feathers everywhere, making small and clumsy movements followed by howls and painful screams coming from its throat. A thick white and yellow halo spread across the ground, further and further, and changing color as it grew in circles. Rapidly, the egg white and the yolk, now completely broken up, had become all mixed up with the blood of the duck, forever sacrificed by the prompt revolutionary alertness of the Korean guards. So, in the end, is that what revolution means? He asked himself before responding to Comrade Lee. Now, without wanting to delay his response too much more, the narrator is nevertheless obliged to make a short interruption at this point in the story to give, in 2 or 3 short lines, a brief profile of the young guerrilla, because this might be useful for understanding his, let's say, existential doubt about the fate of the egg. Pedro Mwanza Agostino, this is what he was called, was an 18-year-old former student who aligned himself with the MPLA so as to help realize a dream that in those times was devoutly shared by most Angolans, to expel the Portuguese colonizers and turn Angola into an independent country. As a result, he only had a vague idea about why and for what he joined, and he only knew the sound of the words with which he had started to become acquainted when he joined the movement, words such as socialism and revolution. A few months after arriving in Congo, where the guerrilla bases were, he was sent to North Korea, a revolutionary, anti-imperialistic country, he was told, to complete a 6-month military training course. Pedro arrived in North Korea full of questions. However, the absurd discussion with Comrade Chang Pang Lee made him wonder if his questions would ever be answered. Since he was only 18, he could not fully understand the long-term implications of this. Because of this, he decided to checkmate Comrade Lee. Being the good Angolan he was, he made his move with all the serenity in the world, enjoying each word as if it were a physical orgasm. I am sorry to inform you, Comrade Professor, but drakes do not lay eggs. Only hens do. If you want to know what happened next, buy the book.